According to a 2022 journal article, most advice given by personal finance gurus isn't supported by any economic theory. This means that what you've been taught about how much you should save,
40% of your after-tax income,
where you should invest,
You've probably heard of this term investing.
or how to repay your debt
now there's multiple ways to do this,
might be based more on vibes than actual economic principles. James Choi, the author of the paper and a professor of finance at Yale, analyzed the advice provided by 50 of the most popular personal finance books, including Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad and Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. But who reads books anymore? For those of you who don't know what a book is like an audiobook, but it's written down instead of spoken. So, in this video, I decided to compare the recommendations from academic economists against the videos from 10 of the most popular personal finance YouTubers like Graham Stephan, Andrei Jikh, and Nate O'Brien, and the results were interesting. Here's how it works. To grade the YouTubers, I created a marking criterion of 13 key recommendations, which broadly cover savings, investing, and debt repayment. For each recommendation, I'll award 1 mark if the videos matches the advice of economists, half a mark if they're sorta in the right area, and 0 marks if they're completely off. If any YouTuber doesn't talk about any one of the recommendations, we'll skip them, and each YouTuber's final mark will be what they scored as a percentage of how many recommendations they provided. If the scores are tied, the YouTuber with more recommendations has the advantage. Hopefully this is made clear throughout the video, but this isn't meant to be a hit piece on any of the YouTubers. I just think it'd be interesting to analyze the information that millions of people receive against information that might not be as well known. Economists love to give their opinion about the broader economy, but why don't we include economists when it comes to personal finance conversations? I'll talk about this more towards the end of the video. One more thing before I begin, I'll be referring to the information by the YouTubers as videos rather than advice, since as we all know, adding hashtag not financial advice to a video makes financial advice not actually financial advice. Which reminds me, this video is also hashtag not financial advice. So with that being said, how much of your income should you save every month?
Try to save at least 15% of your pre-tax income.
40% of your after-tax income,
20%,
10% of your paycheck.
Between 15 and 20%.
just continue to save.
So generally the YouTube videos say that you should save a certain percentage of your income every month, ranging from as low as 10% to as high as 40%. The number isn't too important here. The key idea is that you should always be saving something, as much as possible and as quickly as possible. And this is for several reasons. The most common being to abuse the power of compound interest.
The 8th wonder of the world.
So you have enough money to spend during retirement. Another reason is to instill discipline, so you don't spend money on unnecessary things. When it comes to economists, they actually don't recommend an optimal savings rate like 10% or 20%. They actually don't even recommend looking at how much to save, but rather how much to consume. The optimal savings rate is just the difference between how much you earn and your optimal consumption. Economists look at consumption because of the law of diminishing marginal returns, which is the idea that you receive less joy from something the more you consume it. So the first pizza slice is more enjoyable than the second, which is more enjoyable than the third, and so on. Let's look at how this applies to saving money over a person's life. Imagine we had money to buy 10 slices of pizza over a 10-day lifespan. If we wanted to avoid triggering diminishing marginal returns, economists recommend spreading out the consumption over time, which is known as consumption smoothing. If we instead saved our money until the final 3 days, and even if compound interest grows the 10 pizza slices into 15 pizza slices, our overall happiness in life wouldn't be as high as when we smoothed our consumption. But that's just pizza. How does this apply to a person's life? Well, generally speaking, a person's income with respect to their age is hump-shaped. They earn little in the first 2 decades of life, earn most of their money between 20 and 65, and back to not earning much once they retire. When we combine this curve with the flat consumption curve that represents consumption smoothing, we get what's called the life cycle hypothesis. What we can see from this model is that in a person's early life, they should have negative or low savings. In their middle life, they should have positive savings, and at retirement, they should have negative savings again. Early negative savings usually represents loans, particularly student loans and borrowing from parents or other sources. Okay, so now back to the YouTubers. None of the 10 YouTubers explicitly mentioned consumption smoothing as the optimal savings rate, so none of them gets full marks. That being said, Graham Stephan, Nate O'Brien, and Andrei Jikh advocate for increasing your savings rate as your income increases. which is pretty consistent with consumption smoothing.
So once you begin hitting some of these maximums, you should just get in the habit of investing and saving the difference consistently.
So if you're making over $50,000 per year after tax, I would try to really switch these numbers around and go the 50-20-30 rule rather than the 50-30-20 rule.
Is 65%. But to do that, you have to have a higher salary of around 6 figures.
Nischa mentions that you shouldn't save too much when you're young and to borrow from your future self to grow your current skill set.
So although it's very tempting to start saving as much as possible straight away as soon as you start earning, it's also a really crucial time to consider reinvesting that money back into you.
Humphrey Yang says your savings rate
will depend on your goals. You see, financial independence is actually dictated by how much you have saved already, how much you expect to spend for the rest of your life, as well as what your income is and what your savings rate is.
And Vincent Chan has said that how much you save depends on your personal factors.
Personal finance is personal for a reason. And while the 50-30-20 budgeting rule may be a good rule of thumb for many who are starting their journey, it doesn't work for everyone for their entire lives.
So they all get half a mark and everyone else gets a 0. Now, moving on to the next recommendation, should you categorize your expenses or do what economists call mental accounting? No. According to economists, the answer is no, you shouldn't do mental accounting. Money is fungible. In other words, money is money is money. Mental accounting is a model that was developed by Nobel-winning behavioral economist Richard Thaler. It's what people do when they mentally split their money into different accounts, like money that's for saving for a house, or money that's for saving for a holiday, or when people split their expenses into different categories like clothing, food, or gas. Does this sound like something that you do right now? The problem with mental accounting is that it can result in people demonstrating greater loss aversion for certain mental accounts, resulting in cognitive bias that incentivizes systematic departures from consumer rationality. And how do I know this? Well, Wikipedia. But in simpler terms, creating barriers that only exist in your mind and not your wallet could lead to situations where it's actually worse than it needs to be. Let's look at a simple example where you budget $100 for gas and $100 for food. And let's say at the end of the month you've spent $80 on gas and $100 on food. If you're out of food and you're hungry, well, rationally speaking, you should probably spend $20 on food. If you instead follow the budget, you're not allowed to spend $20 on food. However, you are freely allowed to spend $20 on gas as it'll perfectly fit in your budget. And unless you're a Morton Joe, that's probably not going to give you any happiness. At the end of the day, your wallet doesn't care where the $20 has gone to, only that it's gone. So you might as well spend it on something that gives you the most happiness. Looking at the YouTubers, all 10 have videos saying that you should budget money into mental accounts, so they all get 0. Vincent Chan actually calls out mental accounting as a psychological flaw in this video.
64% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck because they commit one of the worst financial mistakes. In psychology, they call it mental accounting.
But in the same video, he recommends budgeting money into different mental accounts.
First, housing, which could be rent or mortgage. Generally, you want this to be under 30% of your income. Second, groceries and food, about 10% of your income. Third, insurance and utilities like internet, cell phone, and electricity, about 10%.
So half a mark for him, I guess. And in the last recommendation for savings, economists recommend annuitizing your wealth during retirement. This means buying life annuities to pay you a fixed amount every period, as a way to not outlive your savings. In Choi's paper, only 4 out of the 50 finance books talks about life annuities, and it's a similar story here. As far as I've researched, none of the YouTubers recommended for or against life annuities, so they all get a pass. Maybe it's a topic for Graham Stephan's next video, or maybe he'll talk about it when the life annuity market crashes. To wrap up savings, Vincent Chan is leading with 50%, followed by Graham Stephan, Nischa, Humphrey Yang, Nate O'Brien, and Andrei Jikh, all with 25%. Now on to where to invest your money. To kick off this category, we have 3 investment recommendations which are related to each other. How to invest short-term spending, how many shares you should buy over your lifetime, and why. In terms of investing short-term spending, all the YouTubers say to keep your emergency fund
and a high-interest savings account.
High interest rate savings account.
High yield savings account.
And the idea here is that you have access to it at any time,
which means easily accessible, and it needs to be predictable.
A savings account that generates you some interest.
We're talking about something that's going to keep up with inflation.
It's still better than losing the full 3% in value each year if you put it into a normal checkings account.
Andrei Jikh mentions that he keeps his emergency fund in
something like BlockFi, which I use, where it gives me money up to 8.5% annual compound interest, which is insane.
Yeah, for some reason, I don't think he's doing that anymore. When it comes to how much equity should make up a person's portfolio, most recommended it to be hump-shaped with respect to age. So that means a low amount of equities in early life, a high amount in middle life, and lower again during retirement. Kinda like income in the life cycle hypothesis. And the reason for this shape was fairly consistent among the YouTubers. Young people have a lot of short-term spending requirements, and they need to build up an emergency fund, so their equity allocation will be low. Once they're older, they should start investing in equities for those sweet stock market gains. When they start to approach retirement, a large chunk of equities should be swapped out for bonds. Specifically, Andrei Jikh mentions a common rule to calculate how much you should invest in shares.
You can take 110 and subtract your age.
And Rose Han says to
own your age in bonds.
All the YouTubers that advocate for the hump shape mention a common reasoning. After building up for savings, young people should start to invest in equities because they can afford to take more risks. Graham Stephan, Rose Han, Humphrey Yang, and the Financial Diet all say stocks display mean reversion. Or in their words, stocks always go back up after a dip.
Also gives you the best chance to recover in any sort of market drop in the short term because you know that over the long term, it's going to be going up in value over time.
So investors with longer investment horizons, in other words young people, should invest more in equities. Bonds offer less volatility, so they're more appropriate for someone who's approaching retirement. In Choi's paper, other reasons listed by finance authors for why younger people should invest more in equities include stocks being less likely to underperform bonds, stocks being less likely to have a negative return as the investment horizon grows, and stocks growing because the economy grows. When it comes to academic economists, they also recommend investing money needed for short-term spending on short-term liquid assets, so everyone gets a mark here. Economists also recommend a hump-shaped equity allocation. So Graham Stephan, Andrei Jikh, Vincent Chan, Rose Han, Humphrey Yang, Nate O'Brien, and Charlie Chang all get a point here. The Financial Diet and Minority Mindset describe an equity style that's consistent with a hump shape without actually calling it a hump shape, so they get half a mark. Nischa is the only YouTuber to not have an equity allocation that varies with age, but it might just be because her channel is relatively new and she just hasn't gotten around to it yet. When it comes to the reasoning for this hump shape, economists actually disagree with the reasons provided by the YouTubers, so no one gets a mark here. Rather than look at the expected returns of the assets like the YouTubers did, economists prefer to look at the variance. Just a quick warning, this section's pretty technical and I'm not paid enough to simplify it, so here's a video of me playing Subway Surfers on the side. Assuming stocks are identically and independently distributed, stocks outperform bonds as the investment horizon increases. But this is offset by the variance of the cumulative stock returns also increasing. Assuming constant relative risk aversion utility and no labor income, Samuelson and Merton find in the 1969 papers that the optimal equity allocation doesn't vary with investment horizon. And yeah, I know, economists and their assumptions, am I right? But bear with me because I promise we are getting somewhere. In their 1997 book, The Econometrics of Financial Markets, Campbell, Lowe, and McKinley conclude that there's little evidence of the mean reversion of long horizon returns described by the YouTubers, where low recent stock market returns unconditionally predict high future returns. However, Cochrane finds in his 2009 book, Asset Pricing, Revised Edition, that if low stock market returns lower the price-dividend ratio because they aren't accompanied by a drop in dividends, they do forecast higher returns. And Barbaros finds in his 2000 paper that if we take into account today's price-dividend ratio and expectations of how it will evolve in the future, the conditional annualized variance of cumulative log stock market returns declines with investment horizon. And Choi says conditional variances are the theoretically relevant factor for investment decisions, and he believes most financial economists agree with Barbaros's findings. So, all of that is to say, longer-term investors should invest more in equities than short-term investors. No wonder people would rather listen to YouTubers than economists. I actually skipped a lot more to make this section a lot shorter, so check out his paper in the description below if you want to read more about the optimal equity allocation. But that was just equities. What about the bond allocation for people approaching retirement? Okay, this one's a lot more interesting. At least in my opinion. Bonds are assets that pay you a fixed amount every period. Similarly, a person's full-time salary is a fixed amount paid every period. So a young person implicitly has a fixed income asset with hundreds of incoming future payments. Their career. As someone ages, the number of incoming future payments decreases. So to replace this fixed income, a person should invest in bonds. Now that we know the optimal equity allocation for investors, what should they invest in? Should they seek high dividend paying stocks? Economists aren't really fans of dividends when it comes to investing. In 1961, Miller and Modigliani showed that in a frictionless market with no taxes, how much a firm pays out in dividends is irrelevant in its valuation. Ben Felix provides a good summation on the dividend irrelevance theory in this tweet. And yeah, I know. Again, economists and their assumptions, am I right? Well, in the real world, dividends are taxed much worse than capital gains, at least in the US. At least that's what Choi says. I don't know, I don't live in the US. So dividends as a source of income doesn't really make sense. Graham Stephan, Andrei Jikh, Nate O'Brien, Rose Han, Minority Mindset, Humphrey Yang, and Charlie Chang all have videos describing how they earn passive income through dividends. So they all get 0 marks. Everyone else gets a pass since they don't talk about dividends. Okay, what about equity style recommendations like value stocks or small cap stocks? Value stocks are stocks with relatively low prices compared to their fundamentals. Small cap stocks are stocks with small caps. Value stocks have historically had higher returns than the counterparts, growth stocks. Similarly, small cap stocks have historically had higher returns than large cap stocks. Sounds like value stocks and small cap stocks are attractive, right? The current academic literature is unsure whether these return differences are due to mispricing or rational compensation for risk that's not captured by the market beta. If that didn't make sense to you, well, economists basically aren't sure whether or not value stocks and small cap stocks are attractive or not. Andrei Jikh, Vincent Chan, Nate O'Brien, Minority Mindset, Humphrey Yang, and Charlie Chang all get half a mark here for recommending value stocks. So high dividends aren't attractive, and value stocks and small cap stocks may or may not be attractive. So what should investors invest in?
One of the best strategies for the average investor is
something called an index fund.
Invest in index funds.
Index funds.
Index funds.
Index funds.
Not to be confused with index fingers or index cards, are a
Passive fund strategy.
Tracking a market index.
They might track the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average or maybe the NASDAQ, right?
All the YouTubers recommended that investors should passively invest in index funds rather than pursue actively managed funds, which is the same as economists, so everyone gets full marks here. YouTubers and economists agree. The average active fund underperforms the average passive fund by 0.67% per year according to French. Choi believes that the widely public, easy to understand, and straightforward calculations of the statistics of average fund performance leads to economists and personal finance gurus to massively agree here. But there are a ton of index funds to choose from. Which do the YouTubers say to invest in? All of them recommend an S&P 500 index fund.
S&P 500.
The S&P 500.
The S&P 500 index.
The S&P 500, which is just the 500 largest companies in the US.
When discussing adding international stocks to a person's portfolio, most YouTubers recommended keeping most, if not all of their investments domestic. Nate O'Brien recommends investing domestically, since there's an information gap when it comes to other countries.
I understand the US. I've lived here my entire life, and I'm not investing a lot into some other country like Sweden because I don't understand Swedish laws as well as I understand US laws.
Humphrey Yang says,
there's currency considerations. In addition, a lot of international markets aren't as developed as the United States, and a lot of these international markets have governments that are a little bit too, I would say, overbearing.
And Vincent Chan recommends not investing internationally at all.
Because the top US companies that you're getting from the total stock market already has exposure within the international markets. So it doesn't make too much sense to have international exposure from the total stock market as well as specifically purely in international funds, because since we are in a global economy now, everything pretty much has a footprint everywhere inside the world.
Economists recommend holding international stocks in proportion to the global market cap. Assuming frictionless markets with homogeneous investors, this is the optimal choice for investors. But besides the theory, a lot of academic literature rejects a lot of the claims made by the YouTubers. Perrault and Schulman found that currency risk can be hedged away at a negligible cost in major currencies. Lewis finds that the correlation between multinationals and their own stock markets is high, so trying to gain international diversification from investing in US companies with international exposure is limited. And French and Faturba find that the perceived foreign risk due to low information quality necessary to rationalize the observed level of home bias is too large to be plausible. Now looking at the leaderboard now that we're done with investing, Vincent Chan is in first place with 56.25%, and Andrei Jikh, Nate O'Brien, and Humphrey Yang are tied second with 44.44%. Now onto the last category, debt repayment. Should you co-hold high interest debt like credit cards with low interest assets like a savings account? This one was a lot more divisive than I thought. Graham Stephan, Humphrey Yang, Andrei Jikh, and Rose Han all recommended paying off high interest debt before building up an emergency fund. Very strangely, Charlie Chang recommends paying off high interest debt before investing in this video. How to save $10,000 fast, guaranteed guaranteed. He even has a cool diagram to explain his reasoning.
This debt is growing a lot faster than this. So instead of putting money into stocks at this point, it's going to be much more beneficial for you to put that same amount of money into your debt, into your loan.
But he puts it all the way at the back at step 9. And this is weird because in step 6 of how to save $10,000 fast, guaranteed, his recommendation is to put money into investments that you don't touch. And I don't know about you, but to me that's kind of contradictory. When it comes to economists, they recommend paying off high interest debt first due to the high discrepancies in interest rates in credit cards and savings accounts. But how should someone pay off their debts? According to the YouTubers, there's 2 different ways to pay off your debt: the debt avalanche method and the debt snowball method. The debt snowball method was popularized by Dave Ramsey. Here's Dave to explain it.
You list your debts smallest to largest. You pay minimum payments on everything but the little one. You attack the little one with a vengeance.
The debt avalanche method is when you rank your debts in terms of their interest rates and prioritize from there. Mathematically, the debt avalanche method is the method that will save you the most money, so economists prefer this method. Nischa and Charlie Chang get full marks here as they recommend prioritizing high interest debt. Everyone else gets half marks since they recommend both the debt snowball and the debt avalanche. And lastly, we have what to choose for your home loan, a fixed rate or an adjustable rate mortgage. Only 2 YouTubers uploaded videos on this topic and they had completely different recommendations. Graham Stephan recommended that
I would personally stay away from short-term or adjustable rate mortgages unless you really understand what you're doing.
Minority Mindset mentions that
ARMs can be good when you're in an interest rate environment where you think interest rates are going to go down.
Otherwise, choose fixed rates if interest rates are already low. Economists, specifically Campbell and Coco, agree with Minority Mindset's approach of choosing adjustable rates unless interest rates are already low. Guran, Krishnamurthy and McQuaid found that adjustable rates are better than fixed rates for economic stability since short-term interest rates tend to fall more than long-term rates during recessions. So, with all of the recommendations complete, Andrei Jikh and Humphrey Yang are the winners, both scoring 50% and answering 11 recommendations. In third place is Vincent Chan, also scoring 50% and answering 10 recommendations. If you want to check out how I calculated the full results, I've linked my Substack below, including all the sources I found for each YouTuber. Taking a look at the final results, all the YouTubers scored pretty badly. So I think it's safe to say that all the personal finance advice that you hear online is bad, and all the personal finance gurus that give you this advice are bad people. Thanks for watching the video. Bye. Okay, in all seriousness, it's never that straightforward. Honestly, I think this part's probably the most important part of the video. So the advice given by the YouTubers is quite different from the advice given by academic economists. But does it really matter? Like, who said academic economists were right? I think Choi puts it best in his conclusion here. Popular financial advice can deviate from normative economic theory because of fallacies. Put it this way, if an economist was to write a research paper about how to stop smoking, one of the solutions they would provide would be, a rational person would look inwards and realize that smoking is causing harm to the body, and therefore they will stop smoking right then. And there lies the problem. A key assumption in a lot of economic models is a rational person. And we all know how much economists love assumptions. In the consumption smoothing recommendation, economists recommend people start saving after years of negative savings as young adults. As if it's easy as flicking a switch. Saving while you're young might actually instill a sense of discipline, so what the YouTubers did would be completely valid. In the no mental accounting recommendation, Choi points out a study that shows that mental accounting increases motivation to save. And I budget my money into different mental accounts just for a peace of mind to know that I can afford some things. In the equity allocation recommendation, can you imagine trying to explain to millions of people that their equity share should depend on how quickly marginal utility diminishes and how much stock returns co-vary with marginal utility? I mean, simple and easy to understand rules like your age in bonds would travel much farther. And in the no debt snowball recommendation, Dave Ramsey knows that this is the mathematically inferior option. And according to some YouTube comments, it's a technique that really works. However, the psychological benefits it provides isn't measured by economists at all. So yeah, finance YouTubers often provide different advice to academic economists. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Here's Choi again. Popular advice may be more practically useful to the ordinary individual. Developing normative economic models with human features, rather than ceding personal finance advice to non-economists, may be a fruitful direction for future research. Thanks for watching the video. Please consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you.